Hello, everyone. My name is Michael Horvath, and today I will be talking to you about emergency preparedness and the response to a nuclear disaster. Now, first of all, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the NRC, and the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, are responsible for the emergency plans and responses to nuclear disasters in the United States. There are approximately 3 million people living within a 10-mile radius of nuclear power plants, and each of these families should prepare emergency kits and plans for a nuclear emergency should that occur. The nuclear plants throughout the US are privately held, but are regulated by NRC and must adhere to the safety guidelines and emergency plans established by NRC and FEMA. Now, while NRC and FEMA have emergency preparedness plans, these would not support the nation in the event of a catastrophic nuclear disaster, such as what occurred in Japan at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. Now, according to IEER, there were a total of 10 nuclear reactor accidents dating between 1952 to 2011. The extent of the damages ranged from minor leaks to major meltdowns, such as in Chernobyl, Ukraine, where 7 million people were potentially affected, to Fukushima, Japan, where there was a cooling system failure and hydrogen explosion, where 2.4 million people were affected. Now, the only nuclear accident in the US, however, was at 3 Mile Island in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, where there was a cooling system failure and a partial meltdown. Now, in this case, there was limited exposure to the neighboring communities due to the secondary containment of the nuclear material. Now, nuclear plants are required by the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the NRC, in coordination with FEMA to create an effective emergency preparedness and response plan through working with local, state, and federal agencies, as well as both private and public nonprofit groups, which provide emergency services. While there is, however, a remote possibility of a nuclear disaster at a power plant, emergency planning and preparedness are essential, as are emergency response measures. The nuclear plant owners are also required to submit their emergency plans with the NRC and FEMA every 2 years. DHS also recommends planning by each family who lives within the possible affected area of a nuclear power plant. They recommend building an emergency supply kit, which includes such items as a gallon of water, non perishable food items, battery with a hand crank radio, flashlights, a first aid kit, extra batteries, a whistle, dust mask, moist towelettes, a wrench or pliers, a manual can opener, local maps, and a cell phone with a charger. Now, there are four total levels of emergency classifications according to NEI and the NRC regulations. These range from the least to the most critical, such as an unusual event which does not release radioactive material, but internal plant safety and no offsite responders are needed. An alert, where there is a substantial concern about plant safety. However, any release of radioactive material would be small, in accordance with EPA public exposure levels. A site area emergency, which is a major failure of the plant functions which suggest a possible radiological release. But the offsite doses are not expected to exceed the EPA protection guideline exposure levels, except near the site. And finally, a general emergency, which suggests substantial damage to the nuclear fuel with a potential for loss of containment and radiation release. It would exceed the EPA's public exposure levels for offsite for more than the immediate plant area. Now, the personnel located at the nuclear plant are required to notify the state and local authorities immediately, as well as both NRC and FEMA. The state and local emergency management and response teams will determine what measures are required to notify and protect the communities surrounding the nuclear plant. In addition, FEMA's Radiological Emergency Preparedness Program supports the state and local government in their emergency planning and response efforts. Also, the Interim Standard Operating Guide SOG, was developed by the Department of Homeland Security in 2018 to coordinate the efforts of FEMA and the NRC in order to mitigate the effects of a nuclear disaster and ensure that our nation is prepared and can respond quickly afterwards. Now, it is also the duty of the local authorities to notify the local communities immediately after a nuclear plant accident once they have assessed the extent of the nuclear damage. They determine the extent of their response based upon the emergency planning zones, the EPZs, which they identify as follows. A 10-mile emergency planning zone, referred to as plume exposure pathway, which is designed to protect communities from radiation exposure in the event of an accident. The local medical emergency responders may also distribute potassium iodide, Ki tablets, in order to help reduce long-term effects of the nuclear fallout to prevent cancer. Following, we have the 50-mile EPZ, referred to as ingestion exposure pathway, which is the area which food products, livestock, and water should be monitored in order to protect the communities from radiological exposure through consumption of radiation contamination. In addition, the residents within the 10-mile radius would be evacuated or informed to seek shelter if there is enough time to warn or evacuate them. NRC indicates that there would be enough time for the community to find safety, since the releasing of the radioactive material is at a slow pace. In addition, designated employees of the nuclear plant are part of the emergency response team and are required to attend training and qualify for the roles of being an emergency responder. The companies also offer training to local community emergency responders in case of a nuclear emergency. Also, the NRC requires the nuclear plants to conduct training drills in alternate years in order to test their emergency response capabilities, and the local and state emergency management personnel are required to participate in these drills. Finally, a follow-up report is required to identify those areas in need of improvement, and corrective action is required, therefore, based on the inspection from the NRC. Finally, this presentation focused on emergency preparedness and response procedures for communities in the vicinity of a nuclear plant accident. However, in spite of this, if there is a nuclear emergency which stems from terrorism or sabotage, there would be a major crisis, and one which would follow similar emergency responses, but at a much larger scale. According to Yemen, the major natural disaster which occurred at Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant in Japan occurred due to an earthquake and tsunami. While Japan was prepared to react to a normal nuclear accident, this was extreme, and they were ill prepared for it, unfortunately. Therefore, it is important for the United States to be vigilant in their emergency preparedness for nuclear disasters. That's about it for my presentation today. Thank you all for watching, and good night.